Yeah.
Welcome in. Yeah. So, Phil Longo out as Wisconsin's offensive coordinator. There is nothing more certain in the sports world than for myself and Jesse to complete a podcast, which we did, and to post such podcast and then for news to break. And that's exactly what has happened. Wisconsin has fired offensive coordinator Phil Longo. As you can see, Jesse Temple not with me right now. He's obviously got duties with the Athletic and all the stuff that comes along with this move. So he perhaps might join later on. Instead, I brought in my favorite former co-host. It is Ben Kenny. Ben, we were together when the news broke. I shouldn't say we were together. I think I was out in California when the news broke, but we did like a breaking news podcast when of Kenny and Heilprin when this whole thing happened originally, right? And now Wisconsin has made the move. Luke Fickell has made the move after less than 2 years to move on from Phil Longo. I didn't necessarily expect it because he took issue with what happened at Purdue with Graham Harrell and him getting fired in the middle of the season. He's like, yeah, I don't really like that type of stuff and all that stuff. He pulls the trigger with 2 games left. I don't know that it matters at all, but at least it gives us an idea of where this thing is headed, even though we kind of felt like it was going to be going this way.
Yeah, it's a substantial move. I don't really know where to start, to be honest. I mean, like, there is the rest of the season. What is it going to look like now? Like, you're not installing a new offense, right? You're firing Longo, and then you're still going to run the same stuff. It's kind of not procedural, but you know what I mean? It kind of just means more big picture. It's not like it drastically changes next week's game. But no, it's a drastic move. I think, honestly, not that this starts the clock on Fickell, because I think it's already been, when he's not winning at that rate, I think naturally there's already that kind of attitude. But this move is him admitting that he made a mistake in hiring Longo, and that the move, whether drastic all the way to the air raid or just any big shift offensively, he's kind of admitting that it was a mistake, and he's setting it up where the next hire really has to be the one. Like, this move more than anything, I think everybody knew that, Fickell's not going anywhere. If anything, we see staff changes, we see him get another shot at it. This starts that clock to me. If you want to start big picture, this is, the next hire he makes, and whatever happens next season, the results have to be pretty positive, because there's not really going to be waiting around for all of it to get implemented now.
So it was very interesting last night. You don't normally see Phil Longo after games. You don't. I saw him walking through the McLean Center where we were doing interviews with the players. I saw him in the background walking through, and I had never seen it before. It felt off. Now, obviously, I'm just trying to connect dots to what I saw last night. I also saw Chris McIntosh down in the locker room area, just outside the locker room area, talking with Luke Fickell after the game. These are just, I'm just, adding stuff up here, because what happens with this. Well, no, I'm not saying that any one thing is related to the other. I'm just pointing out some things you see now looking back on it. All right, well, that's a little bit more interesting. But Phil Longo was going to be gone at the end of the season no matter what. I think this was a decision that was made, quite honestly, after the start of the season, and really even probably in the offseason, when they decided to go away from letting Phil Longo run the offense that he wanted to run, and a whole lot more big packages, a whole lot more running than perhaps with power, right? With bigger formations, with bigger personnel packages than what he had ever used before. And so it felt like they were butting heads last year. We heard Luke Fickell talk, I want them to run the ball. We need to be able to run the ball. We need to be able to control the line of scrimmage. It just never really happened last year. And I think Fickell obviously had a role in what they wanted to do offensively this year. And he said, keep going at it. Earlier this year, he was like, keep going at it. We're so close. We're so close to breaking out. And then they had that really good 3-game stretch where they were able to run the ball and throw the ball down the field, and everything was perfect. But I don't think they ever stopped butting heads. And you go back to that press conference with Phil Longo earlier this year, where I'm here to please Coach Fickell. And from that moment on, this day was inevitable. This day was inevitable. And I remember asking Fickle about it, and he just laughed. This day was inevitable from that point on. They never worked together before. They're certainly never going to work together again. But this was a bad choice by Luke Fickle. And we talked about it when it happened. I think we both were actually on board with it to begin with. And then you looked into it a little bit and you saw like the red zone issues that he had. And that became your big thing. But
well, it was more. I'll say this: the issue I found is that the fans of the programs where he used to be all didn't like him, which is a natural fan thing. As you're a fan of the team, you're like, oh yeah, the offensive coordinator sucks. Taking away that cliche, there was an underlying sentiment from Ole Miss people and from North Carolina people that while the numbers look good on the surface, they didn't really like the offense. So that was the part of it. But I mean, totally. If you want to go back then, like, I was excited about it, and probably big picture, I was wrong. But I mean, as soon as I saw it really against Buffalo and as it started last year, I'm with you. It felt inevitable. Honestly, I'm kind of impressed that they actually did it. Part of me was scared that there would be a little bit of this, they would be stubborn and, we have to work. We have to make it work. We have to do it. Because the alternative is, again, they fire Longo, he hires a new guy, and this new guy has to work, or else you start talking about bigger things. So I'm impressed that the move was made, honestly, whether it was inevitable or not.
But what does it mean for now? Like, this feels like there was a blow up here somewhere where it became untenable for them to continue on with this.
Which is then, why did he hire him?
We know why did he? They met. They were at some conferences together and wanted to work together at some point. He tried to get him at Cincinnati. It didn't happen. And so, because obviously he ended up at North Carolina, or I should say at Ole Miss and then North Carolina, it didn't happen. They wanted to work together, but it was a bold choice to make, and it was not the safe choice to make, right? It was certainly not the safe choice to make, to have a guy that you've never worked for before, trying to install an offense that maybe you don't necessarily totally are on board with. Was a really, really poor choice. And you add on to that the fact that they brought in Jack Bicknell Jr. as the offensive line coach last year. Those two things, and just the idea that they had never worked before together, and so you didn't know how it was going to, to mesh. Mm-hmm. It never meshed. And Fickle took a much bigger role this offseason in exactly how it was going to play out. The big question is, does this happen if Tanner Mordecai doesn't get hurt last year or Tyler Van Dyke doesn't get hurt this year? Because, again, I know you were not impressed with the offense from the jump, but the fact remains you have to give it some time. You had to give it some time, and he never truly had his starting quarterback for an extended period of time to run the offense. I don't have a problem with him being fired, but I do wonder if it is a situation where it would have been different if it wasn't for these injuries to the quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, okay. Would they be there right now? Maybe not. But we're talking about Tanner Mordecai was on his 6th year, coming off of impressive numbers. But at SMU, it's not like he was the second coming of Russell Wilson, right?
He's in the NFL right now,
and I think honestly he was probably better than a lot of people thought. But still, like, there's a reason that a 6th year guy is moving to another place as a 6th year, right, as opposed to going to the NFL. Tyler Van Dyke, I think, is the same way. He's better than Braden Locke. But I think there's a reason that he hasn't reached top form in like 4 years. So would it have been different? Yeah, I think they might. I mean, they played better last night. That's for sure. But big picture, I don't think it's different. I want to go back to what you said. I can't believe if you're going to make this big departure from what the program has always been and take this big risk that they aren't on the same page 7 games into the tenure. Like, that's kind of ridiculous. Or 10 games or whenever it was. Where, okay, I get it. You're going to butt heads a little bit when you get down the road. But it only took 7 games for Fickle to say we have to run the ball. Anybody who saw the hire saw it and thought, well, that's kind of odd. Wisconsin usually runs the ball. Like, putting in an...
He runs the... I mean, he ran the ball at North Carolina. Like, anybody... That's just the... I mean, it's just not true. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to call anybody a casual who said all they're going to do is try and throw the ball. That wasn't the offense they ran at North Carolina. But the hire didn't make sense because they hadn't worked together before. And to work with somebody in this job, in this environment, in what the Big Ten was about to become, and not to have any certainty of how you work with that person was a mistake on Luke Fickell's part, for sure.
I'm generalizing when I say they weren't going to run the ball. But for Fickell to say, or for Longo to say, I'm pleasing Fickell, for them to go back to more big personnel and more power, for him actually to have to put his finger on the scale and say, I want to play more like what Wisconsin is traditionally known for and play more to its strengths. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That you go into it saying, okay, we have this idea, but then for it already after 10 or 11 games, for it there to be that much of a rift, or at least that's what it seems like that's an indictment on Fickell for hiring him. Because if you're the head coach, like everybody says, okay, why is Braden Locke under center? Why don't they have a better quarterback? Well, it's like, okay, let's go back to who recruited Braden Locke. Oh, that's Phil Longo and Fickell. So that goes back to him. And then if everybody says, oh, but Fickell needs a new offensive coordinator, needs more time. Well, who hired Longo? It all goes back to the head coach. It's his program, and it's all an extension of him.
It's not all on him. There's a guy above him that also plays a significant role in this. And you wonder what kind of role he had with this, not with the decision, but I'm sure Fickell didn't do it without speaking with him. You know what I mean? And also, he got booed loudly at the game, basketball game on Friday night. Chris McIntosh did, which is very interesting. It's not unexpected. But there's two questions that I'm seeing from the chat. And there are two questions that I don't really know the answer to yet, because if we were talking about this earlier this year, myself and Jesse were like, if you were going to let Phil Longo go in the middle of the year, who's calling plays? They don't have a guy. They do not have like a former offensive coordinator on this staff that can step in.
I have an idea.
What's your smile?
I have an idea. There's an unemployed, recently was employed as an analyst at a top team. Took a top team to the college football playoff last year. Had big opportunities to return as an offensive coordinator this year. Decided to turn them down, probably to wait for a perfect situation.
I mean, everyone knows who you're talking about. We're talking about Paul Chryst, right? Paul Chryst. Yeah. The thing is here, I don't necessarily know. AJ Blazek has been a coordinator very long time ago at a much lower level. But like Kenny Guyton hasn't done it. And certainly Devin Spalding hasn't done it. I don't know what they're going to do in terms of, I'm sure that they have an idea of what it's going to be. And I think it's also very interesting that the timing of this, because, and someone certainly pointed this out, the early signing period starting here in a little bit. And it's hard to recruit with an offensive coordinator that you know is probably not going to be here. I asked Phil about that last week when we got to talk to him. It was, how do you recruit a quarterback? That wasn't specifically what it is, but like, you have another quarterback. How do you recruit him? With the uncertainty that's involved in it. And
do you know the answer? Money.
Yeah,
among other things, but
yes.
But that would be the equalizer.
So the options certainly for who's going to call plays, could be Nate Letton. He's a guy that Fick has been around for a while, and he was not a guy that was going to be the tight ends coach last year. That was going to be Gino Guidugli. Do you remember what his name was? Gino.
Nope.
He's now at Notre Dame.
Guidugli.
Feels like he's a possibility. Maybe as the OC going forward. Maybe next year. I don't know. We've got plenty of time to go through names as this whole thing plays out. But
Paul Chryst, I'm putting Paul Chryst in there.
Yeah, I got you.
I'm with you though. I don't know what they do for the rest of the year. I don't know how much of an impact it will have. It wasn't like, okay, normally this happens in the NFL. A coach gets fired. The next day there might be like a sugar high, or in college where everybody's excited. It's a new coach. We're really into it. Before it does wear off, it usually isn't lasting. It's not like the offense wasn't playing hard. Like that wasn't their problem. You know what I mean? It's not like a new play caller is going to instantly fix what had been struggling. They are playing a Nebraska team that has been playing like crap over the last month. So that's a good thing. They're not playing a defense like Oregon. So I don't know what to expect the rest of the year, to be honest. Like, it kind of just feels like they're going to try to piece it together. And this is more of we have to get out on the recruiting trail, for the class. And then we actually, I mean, these moves are made early so they can get a start on the next coach. And it sounds wrong when they're a coach somewhere else, but you know how these things work. Agents going back channel, and Fickle's going to try to find the next like young rising guy, which is if we want to talk who they should hire, you know, we mentioned how do they revolutionize Wisconsin? And I think the bigger problem with Longo wasn't the fact that he is, you know, a new age or a departure. But if you're going to do that, there are these really, you know, young rising great coordinators in the country, like Will Stein at Oregon. Wisconsin's not going to get him from Oregon, obviously, but that kind of guy who is like, you know, everybody looks at him as the next great coach that's out there. I don't know who Indiana's offensive coordinator is, but Kurt Cignetti is doing something right on that side of the ball. They brought in a transfer quarterback. They have a lot of transfers coming in, and suddenly they have this offense that works. So there are a lot of those kind of names.
Yeah. And again, we're going to,
not Phil Longo.
Yeah. It feels like we have, a lot of time with that, right? We have time to discuss that. It's really about these last two games and exactly how it looks. Kenny Guyton, off the top of my head, forgot that he had a bigger role at Arkansas last year down the stretch. So he could be in it. And it's also now coming back to me. He was running through the McLean Center after Phil Longo last night. So
look at you, Big J.
I'm just thinking back in my head of what I was seeing last night, and it felt off, and obviously there was something to it. But I mean, we're gonna have plenty of time to talk about that. The other part of this was it Phil Longo that was keeping Braden Locke out there, or was it Mabry Matoyer not being ready? I kind of feel like it's the latter, but do we see somebody else other than Braden Locke at quarterback next week against Nebraska?
I bet on the latter. I don't know.
That he wasn't ready.
That he wasn't ready. He's a true freshman he's attempted one collegiate pass. And I mean, that's a number one Oregon team. You're not throwing him into that fire. But even in previous weeks, I don't know, you guys talked all fall camp where Braden Locke has a command of the offense. And maybe this is a cliche, and this is a problem I have with broadcasts. They just get stuck on these talking points. Every time Wisconsin played, they played NBC 3 straight weeks. All they talked about is how Braden Locke is, above the shoulders. He's a student of the game more than anybody. And it's the best trait they kept highlighting, which is code for the guy isn't that good. When you say that he's great upstairs, it usually means he's not the best thrower of the ball. But you guys did talk all fall camp that he had looked good and he had shown progress, and he has actually flashed some ability. I think it kind of it's clearly, gone the wrong direction. But if Wisconsin wants to win, which if we talk about what matters for this team right now, it's making a bowl game. It's extending the bowl streak. If Wisconsin wants to win, they should not put in the true freshman who hasn't played.
Right.
Unless the kid is Arch Manning, he's probably not going to change it. And given what you guys have, what's been talked about from camp, how far away was he? Speak from, leading into the season. I would assume he's pretty far away from being ready.
Yes.
So there you go.
Very, very much so. So Jesse did have his story. For some reason, my notifications on Twitter aren't working very well, so I missed that. But he is reporting that Wisconsin could use tight ends coach Nate Letton to call plays for the remainder of the season. But Fickle's going to have to find somebody he can better marry the concepts he wants to with Wisconsin's talent on its roster. So I asked Jesse
which means running the ball and not, doing what they tried to do to start 2023.
Yeah.
It means actually getting the kids that you can recruit and running an offense around that.
Right.
Which, if you want to go big picture, do they go back to that? I think they kind of need to. They can't do what they just did again.
See, but I think what was in Fickle's mind when he originally went that way was what Ohio State has that spread, but still is a power run team that can punish you. That's what he wanted to be. Or Alabama, where they have those big offensive. You can talk about the wide receivers and the talent and all that stuff you want to, but I'm going to at least finish my thought before you do it.
You're right.
And then the way that Alabama came in and the offensive linemen just absolutely hammering guys. When they came into Wisconsin, just absolutely putting guys in their butts. It wasn't even it just insane what they can do. And then they obviously have the talent on the outside. Wisconsin is never going to get the talent that Alabama and that Ohio State has. But that doesn't mean that they can't run a similar offense, at least in my opinion. You can't go back to what they were prior to 2023. I don't think you can do that in this environment where, unless you're able to pay guys a ton to come and play in that offense, guys are going to go play in offenses that they're going to be able to show their stuff, potentially get more money, and find a way to the league. And that's going to be tough to do in an offense that is, or a scheme, I should say, that is looked at a certain way.
Yeah, I don't mean they have to go back to prehistoric scheme. I mean, but still building around a line and a running back. I don't, and yeah, the objection I was going to bring is, I think when Fickell arrived, I think he was a little bit optimistic about the talent he could get in that offseason. You know, they get Evers and Locke and all of that. I think he was a little bit over his skis about the level of top end talent that he could get. And maybe that's on Wisconsin for NIL. I don't know. That's part of a bigger discussion. But I think he has probably learned over the last 2 years what talent he can, consistently land here, which might even be different than where he was at Cincinnati, and how to build an offense around that, which I think the answer is something in the middle, but more leaning towards, like, I don't know, Kansas State runs like a power-ish kind of offense. You know what I mean? There are teams out there that do it in a new age. But when you think of them, they're a running team. I mean, Michigan, when they have a quarterback, not this year's Michigan, that's a, kind of a disgrace. But I mean, Michigan just won a national title being a run first team. So I do think it works. It can work.
The biggest question is, how do you hang on to the guys that, look, you say they haven't recruited at a high level. They haven't recruited at a top 10 level, top 15 level. The class is still in the top 30. They have taken a step up in terms of recruiting. I don't think that can really, consistent recruiting, I don't think that really can be debated. But how do you hold on to those guys in the way that they want to play? And the quarterbacks are there. Like Landon Locke, I'm completely fine if he never comes here. And that was a Phil Longo thing, right? He had ties with the Locke family. I think that this move certainly, if it hadn't already, certainly ends the Braden Locke era at Wisconsin as well. But like some of these other recruits, how do you hold on to them and give them the knowledge that or they know what you want to be before they sign? Like, what is the message from Fickell and his staff to those guys to say, yep, we are going away from this, but we're going to have something that's even better?
I think the players that are the most important when it comes to that are the linemen. I think about Watts in the class of 2025. It's not as if they had some top end, top 100 receiver in the class. You know what I mean?
I mean, Hilton's pretty good.
Right. Yeah. He's up there. It's about who you hire, but also, those recruits had been watching the team. They know how it was trending. If you can bring in a guy that has good success and you can say that it is going to get better, then I don't think that's going to be hard to sell. I think it would have been harder to sell how they were playing.
Yeah. The bigger question is, do you think he already has his guy? Like, I don't think we always talked about Barry Alvarez, right? And him having his list so that when one of his assistants would leave, he'd have a list of guys to fill in. I don't know if Fickell is like that, but I can't imagine you're making this move without having an idea of which way you're going to go with it. And while we're talking about young up and comers, after working with a guy that you'd never worked with before and it going this way, it feels much more likely that he's going to lean on his past in filling this spot more so than leaning into a new guy, which I know nobody's probably going to like, but I think he wants to feel as good about it as he possibly can, like his relationship with the guy and knowing that he's going to do what he wants him to do, as opposed to what we've seen, for the last 2 years where it feels like they were just butting of heads.
Do you have a name in mind? Is there somebody in his past that you're thinking of?
Well, I mean, Gino from that who feels like that might be a possibility. Look, I
That
don't
doesn't
have.
do it for me.
Well, I know it doesn't, but I just don't see him being a guy that's going to go dip into something that he hasn't worked with before. He just did that. It went horribly. Like I don't know how you can. If you're fickle, you have to make, as you said, you have to make this hire right. This has to be the right hire, and without having knowledge of how a guy works, it feels tough. Now I'll have to go back through Luke Fickell's not tenure, but history and see all the guys he worked with. Maybe there is somebody that he's worked with that was maybe like a lower level staffer that he knows really well, and that guy now is kind of like the next bright mind. We'll find out. But right now, I feel like it's going to be somebody that he has worked with.
So their offensive coordinator in 21 at Cincinnati was Mike Denbrock.
Yeah.
He is now the OC at Notre Dame. And I don't think you're leaving Notre Dame for Wisconsin. By no. You, I mean him. But yeah, I don't know.
Tom Herman?
I mean, that would be I'd be interested in Tom Herman. I mean, listen, I think you do this early in order to be able to, try to land the top guy. It's why McIntosh pulled the Christ move when he did, and it turned into Fickell. So if you're going to do this early and you're going to go look for, like, you don't fire Longo 2 weeks before the end of the season to go hire Gino Guidogli. I don't think. I think it's to try to make a bigger move or to try to get an in with one of those top guys. I'm not smart enough to tell you exactly who that's going to be, but I don't think you do this now in order to settle.
Yeah, no, the timing it feels much more recruiting based than this year based. Would you agree with that? Like this isn't like definitely. This isn't going to jumpstart anything. Like I don't envision all of a sudden them putting up 40 points this week. They've scored 36 the last. No, I mean Nebraska's defense is better than that for sure, right? The bigger question, my biggest question coming out of this was whether Wisconsin was going to be ready mentally to jump off of what happened this week against Oregon and try and jump back in it against Nebraska, considering what happened the last time they lost to a ranked team at home that they should have beaten. They went and got pasted by 42-10 by an Iowa team that threw the ball 10 times. So maybe this is a little bit of a shot in the butt. I don't know.
Yeah, it would have to be scheme wise, right? Because again, I don't think they're
play calling wise.
Yeah, I'm not either. I don't break it. I'm not smart enough to tell you like one play call to another, but it looked like Longo kind of emptied the bag against Oregon. He was doing all he could. And like, even to start the game, I go back to this. I feel like they needed to run the ball in order to give Locke any chance because dropping him back 30 times was going to be a disaster. And the first 4 or 5 runs of the game went for negative yards. So yeah, I don't know if I just think the whole thing is the problem. And also it's kind of a confluence of things. Oregon's defense is really good, right? So maybe they stood no chance either way.
I mean, the quarterback was horrible.
That's true.
The quarterback, and like Phil Longo can't make that pass to Tyree Walker. He got Tyree Walker wide open. Braden Locke tossed the ball 8 feet over his head, right? And he can't throw like Phil Longo did not throw behind Will Pauline the next play on what could have been a first down. He didn't make Braden Locke fumble on the first drive, or throw it right to a guy. Braden Locke's not it. The dude had 96 yards passing. It's the fewest in a game in a loss for Wisconsin since 2018, since your boy Jack Cohn had 60 against Penn State that day. Like that is how bad that performance was. He was hampered by the quarterback, who is also the guy that he brought in. So it's, I'm not giving Phil Longo any kind of a break here. He's the one that thought he was good enough to be here, even though we all know that nobody thought he was good enough to be the starter. That's why they went and got Tyler Van Dyke. But the quarterback is not good enough for them to be successful against quality opponents. Maybe Nebraska's not that quality opponent, and maybe somehow, some way, Braden Locke has a good game. But I would be, I guess I'd be disappointed if he's the one that gets every single snap next week. I can't do it. It was tough to start the game yesterday. He makes some really nice throws, that throw to Vinny Anthony, but he's just not it. He doesn't have it. And that is as big of a problem as anything. If they had a quarterback, like we talked about this on the camp now, which is irrelevant because Phil Longo's gone.
I don't mean to laugh. I feel bad.
It is what
it's
it
really
is. It's
funny
just,
though.
It's just what it is. I mean, it just happens. We put 52 minutes together, and it's most of it's irrelevant. People don't really care about it anymore. But what if they had? Again, it's never going to happen. But like a $3 or $4 million quarterback, right? Like say you had a Dylan Gabriel or a Cam Ward, and you put it with this group. I think they'd be pretty damn successful. They're not beating Iowa, or excuse me, they're not beating Alabama, but they beat USC. They beat Penn State. Who knows what happens if they beat Penn State than the Iowa game, and they win last night. So I don't think it's as far away as maybe it appears, just simply because the quarterback is horrible. We asked the question, is there any quarterback in the last 20 years outside of Braden Locke that loses that game last night for Wisconsin? And I can think of a few. Like,
do you mean starters?
Allen Everidge, yeah. Guys that started games. Allen Everidge probably lose that game.
Chase Wolf.
I don't know, man. Chase Wolf
I think
won
it's
a bowl
pretty
game.
similar.
Yes, both have a penchant for turning the ball over. The difference between the two, Chase Wolf actually was a runner and could take off and make some plays with his legs. That is not any part of Braden Locke's game. So Dustin Shear is another guy that we talked about. Danny O'Brien, perhaps, but it's not a big number. Tanner McAvoy wins that game last night. He couldn't throw the ball worth a shit, but he wins that game last night because of his legs. And he also completed 17 straight passes at one point, which is the school record. No one's going to be able to take that away from him.
Here we go. History lesson.
I mean, I'll go down on the list, man. I will go down the list. You go back all the way to the start of Barry Alvarez, and there is probably one or two, maybe three guys that lose that game last night. Braden Locke is up there. So they had so many opportunities to win that game last night, and they were unable to do it. I don't think that this move has anything to do with it. What happened last night? This was a move that probably should have been made during the bye week, but they made it, and it's a move that became inevitable when Phil Longo saying, "I'm here to please Coach Fickell." Inevitable.
Yeah, I don't. The quarterback is the biggest factor
by far.
I think they would obviously be better with Cam Ward. I don't think that's, I think everybody would agree with that.
Yeah.
I just think they're further away from having that guy than people think.
Financially, yes.
If we want to talk realistically, when Miami offers, $20 million in their crypto wallets, and Wisconsin could be up on NIL or not up on NIL, they're probably not competing with Miami. That's just the reality of the situation.
Or
right?
Oregon or Ohio State or any of these other, what you would call blue blood or new blue blood schools in the case of Oregon. And yeah.
But I think that's part of
because they have Phil Knight, right? We were talking with, and I apologize for interrupting you. We were talking with Greg Gard on the swing a couple weeks ago. And we were talking about NIL and saying, Phil Knight has said, I want a national championship before I die. And so he has poured money into the basketball team. He's obviously poured money into the football team. He wants those things before he's gone. And you have Dave Portnoy willing to throw millions of dollars at a quarterback for Michigan. And then you have Big Cat, who's saying, buy coffee and I'll be able to try and help you get, like, that's where Wisconsin is. Like it's just a different level. Mm-hmm. And Wisconsin's biggest donors, they don't have a guy like that. So go ahead. I apologize.
But that's why, and I think it all goes back to the same thing. I think if we all approach it, and I don't want to do that because people have gotten mad at me in the past for saying this, but if we want to be realistic, they're probably not going to have the quarterback. And by the quarterback, I mean Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, name your guy. They're probably not going to get that guy. Probably. Unless you develop them,
right? Like unless you develop like they have developed over the years. But the problem with that is how many guys are sticking around to be developed anymore?
Right. Fair. If I look, and I know it's a couple years ago and a lot has changed. I mean, Michigan won the Big Ten with Cade McNamara. We've seen where he's gone. I think you can win with guys that are good, and they don't have to be Drew Allar 5-star. You know what I mean? But when you build an offense, and this is going to be, again, this is, I think, where Fickell miscalculated the Longo hire, and Longo probably too coming here, where he had Drake May, who was a legacy and fell in his lap, Sam Howell before that, and he gets credit for it. It's also like North Carolina is a different program too. I think going forward, Fickell has to understand what he can actually get in the offense and how they can actually play, because the line is going to be great. You know, they're going to find great
the talent,
right? They're going to find great running backs.
You actually have to actually follow through and be good,
of course. But he's recruiting the line well. Like, I'm confident in the line. I'm confident in the running backs. I think they can get good receivers. They're not going to be Jeremiah Smith. Again, if we want to be realistic, and I said that, you know, if they could recruit Penn State talent, then they could be up there on that tier. Still, like, that's another 3 jumps from where they are right now. 25 is good. I mean, Penn State's finishing in the top 15. And when you look up and down their roster right now, like, you saw why Penn State won that game. It was because they had another extra dude in a big spot, and Oregon as well, I would argue. I know you're shaking your head, but
I'm shaking my head because they won that game because Braden Locke threw it right to a guy.
That guy's good. I mean, I'll give him credit for making the play. Nick
Absolutely
Singleton.
Not. I give him zero credit for making that play. I give him zero credit for making that play. Braden Locke threw it right to him. If he doesn't make that play, he should be benched. Like, he threw it right to him, and that was the game. As soon as that happened, that was the game. But go ahead. Last night, Wisconsin had their chances. They had, yeah.
The bigger point is, though, I think going
maybe
forward,
Locke should be the OC. He's very smart, right? Like he's obviously
they love talking about how smart he is.
Right? He's obviously very, very smart. Not always great in play smartness or in intelligence, where to throw the ball or where to put the ball, but very smart, gets him into good plays and all that. Maybe you bench him, make him the OC.
Mm-hmm.
Because he's going to be a coach someday. There's no chance he's going to be a quarterback anywhere, but he's going to be a coach someday.
Can Aaron Witt play quarterback? Like, what can we do these last couple games?
Yeah. Well, hey, we saw the Wildcat last night, right? We saw.
I know. Longo
maybe
did
do that.
Bag.
Somehow get Cade Yakimelli on the field with those 3 guys, and then have, you know, Aker as your blocking fullback, and just full triple option it. Remember the triple option that you're like, I'll take Jeff Sims running the triple option over this.
I think Michigan this year, which, I mean, by the way, if you want to have, you speak of a kid turning down $11 million for Michigan. He's turning down $11 million for Michigan because I don't think, I'm not confident in Sharon Moore as a very good coach. I think the way he's handled that whole thing has kind of been a disaster. But so yes, Michigan on that blue blood tier, but it's not as if they are getting him. Like, he's probably going to LSU.
Right. You know what I'm saying? Like, I do. They're willing to throw that money because they do not want to see what they saw again this year. Right. They're sick of, they had a quarterback for 3 years, 4 years. They didn't this year, and they hated it. Wisconsin has not had a quarterback for how long?
2019.
Everyone's hating it, right? Everyone's hating it. They don't want to see, they want something. They need something. They need more than what they've gotten. And that Michigan got tired after 6 games, maybe after 4. Wisconsin is tired of it, but they don't have the ability to go and do what Michigan does.
So here's the question. Would you take a Brendan Sullivan who's better at throwing?
No, absolutely not. I don't want Brendan Sullivan.
I still point, and you can call me crazy, I still point to Iowa, who's going to win 8 or 9 games this year and is in a fantastic place as a program. Even though they've lost some games and they're still not beating the top teams in the conference. I don't think it's deniable that they are in a great place. You know, Cade McNamara is horrible. They have to find a better quarterback. But their offense has gotten much better under a new coordinator. But they're still Iowa. You know, they're still doing the same thing.
I mean, they still can't throw the ball. And they
beat Wisconsin by 40.
Did they beat Wisconsin by throwing the ball? Or did they beat the Wisconsin by running it down their throat?
Well,
they didn't beat them by...
The
They ran
former
for
is what I would point
329
to
yards,
is
dude.
strength. No, I know, but that's what they're built around.
They're still like 120th in passing yards. It's not like they've changed a ton. They're better at running the ball. They know who they are. That's the thing that Iowa and Wisconsin for a long time was so good at. They knew who they were. Wisconsin doesn't know who it is right now, and Iowa does.
But that's what I'm saying. Or that's the question, is would you accept them going back? Not to that, because going to Iowa is dropping down to the, as you mentioned, in like the 100s, but going back to that kind of approach.
Of
Like I would accept that.
Like of knowing who you are?
Of
I don't want Cade McNamara type quarterbacks at Wisconsin either. Right?
He might be especially poor.
Yeah. I think that I think if Tanner Mordecai stays healthy last year, we're not, it's a different conversation. If Tyler Van Dyke stays healthy this year, it's a different conversation. They had the quarterbacks that they want. The offense may not have been significantly better, but I think their record is better if both those quarterbacks have been healthy the entire year. They've been snake bitten by that. And that really hurt any ability for them to get the offense going. But the problem between Luke Fickell and Phil Longo was not about the quarterback. It was about how the offense was going to be run no matter who the quarterback was. And butting heads as early as they did last year, what was happening this year, this felt inevitable almost from, as I said, from the time that he said, I'm just here to please Coach Fickell. It felt inevitable before that. And it certainly has come to be that way.
Why do you think they didn't do it before the bye week? Why was last night the last straw?
It feels like there was a blow up there. It feels like there was some, because maybe they didn't want to do it going against the number one team in the country. I think that's certainly maybe a possibility. They didn't want to have to try and trot out a new play caller against the number one team in the country. But to me, that's when you do it.
And you have a week. And you have a bye week to do it.
Yeah.
Now you have what, 4 days?
Yeah. Again, as opposed to some of the other stuff, like Phil Longo had his own language with, his signaling and stuff. Like he didn't have like a whole bunch of people around him signaling in and all that good stuff. And it's, he was very set in his ways of how he was going to do things. And he did the exact same thing. He told us all the time that he has done the exact same thing. The offense has not changed in 20 plus years. Like there are some tweaks here and there, but it hasn't changed. We're going to do what we're going to do, and we're going to do it well. And for the most part during his tenure, that was not the case.
Longo said his offense hasn't changed in 20 years.
Yeah.
That's probably a problem.
Well, he said the basics of it, the foundations of it have not changed since he learned it under Mike Leach or from Mike Leach. And I think Leach was pretty open about that too. You do things a certain way. You pressure teams or defenses a certain way, and you take what they give you. And teams were more than willing to give them little dink and dunks, and not really allow them to beat them over the top. And yeah, look, his first press conference with media, he said, we want to stretch them horizontally before the play and vertically during the play. And I can probably count on one hand how many times how many games they did that. The offense just never worked the way that he said it was going to work. And we can say it's personnel, but they have some talent, and for whatever reason, it just never worked. And maybe it just was never going to work at Wisconsin.
So are you saying it's coaching? What do you think it's more of?
I think one, the lack of having your starting quarterback consistently. I think that's a big part of it. But I also think Phil Longo wanted to run it one way. Luke Fickell's vision for it was something else. They did not mesh, and it was a horrible decision and a horrible hire by Luke Fickell, which makes his next hire just so vital. It is not just one thing, right? Like it's not. This move is not because of one thing. If I had to put it on one thing, I'd probably say a lack of a quarterback more so than anything. Mm-hmm. But Phil Longo has to take the blame for that. his job was to find quarterbacks that would be able to run this offense at a high level. And I felt like he found, certainly with Tanner Mordecai, maybe with Tyler Van Dyke, but Braden Locke wasn't it. And that's on him.
So how many games was it last year before Mordecai got hurt?
He got hurt in the Iowa
6.
game, so
they were 4-2, I think. Seventh game.
They lost to Washington State, and they lost to Washington. I actually, you know what? I think the Iowa game was like early October. That was after they had beaten Purdue, right?
The Iowa game was game number 6 after they had beat Purdue and Rutgers.
So they were 4-1 overall, right?
Correct.
2-0 in Big Ten play, and the offense had looked pretty darn good against Purdue, not so great against Rutgers, and they weren't looking very good against Iowa before he got hurt. But then the Iowa game, and then it's Illinois, and then it's Ohio State, and then it's Indiana. And yeah, I think they win some of those games. Well, I don't know about the Ohio State game, but they beat Indiana if Tanner Mordecai is healthy. He just wasn't good enough. The thing is, he didn't turn the ball. He didn't throw interceptions last year. He just couldn't hold on to the ball. He was a fumble machine. And this year he's turned into an interception machine because he can't see guys that are right in front of his face.
Yeah, I bring up the Mordecai. I agree with you. If he's healthy, the conversation's different because I agree with you. I think he's better than, clearly, like he's on an NFL practice squad. But I do think we saw a bigger sample of him healthy in the offense than, we think in hindsight. And I don't know, maybe I was just
Did we? Because he wasn't, even when he came back, he wasn't healthy. They couldn't put him under center because he couldn't take snaps because they were afraid that he was going to hurt his hand again. Well, he didn't actually get to take the thing off his hand until the Minnesota game. Pretty darn good game for him. And the one game where, and again, I know LSU's defense was trash. I get that. But
horrible.
Tanner Mordecai was on fire that game. He was fantastic, dropping balls right where they needed to be, even with defenders where they were at. But Tanner Mordecai is a talented thrower. And if he had been healthy the entire year, I think the offense revs up earlier than the LSU game.
I guess when he was healthy before the injury, that's what I'm thinking of. And I would note that before he got hurt, they did go under center against Iowa, and it was still, a screenshot that's etched into my brain. It was still a disaster. Total disaster. That was just like, don't do that if you clearly haven't practiced it once. Like they barely knew how to line up. But no, I'm thinking back, like they weren't that impressive against Rutgers.
No.
And they played well against Purdue. They did. I think it's been clear that Purdue is, a bottom 20 team in the country under Ryan Walters, and their defense is absolutely god awful. So
this year for sure.
But I think overall, like even before that, I don't think Mordecai was overly impressive in the offense. And I'm not blaming Mordecai because I think he's clearly good. I just think, we've seen a bigger extended time with him than we want to admit. It never showed signs of life for me. It never did. We could say that if Van Dyke was healthy, they would have won last night. Probably. That's because the defense played out of its mind. Even when Van Dyke was there, but in the first 2 non-conference games against nobody and an FCS team, whether they were a top 5 FCS team or not, like the offense looked pretty bad. They were almost losing those games. Yeah. So even in the time where the quarterbacks were healthy, it didn't look good. It wasn't as if it was, RG3 on the Redskins and he's winning MVP and then he gets hurt. It's like, no, they were like at the start of this year. Those games were like close to disasters and everybody's Longo saving the bag for Alabama. It's like, no, he's not. They just aren't good.
Yeah. Again, throwing a quarterback into a new system and expecting it to be, perfect from the start, from the jump, feels a little bit much. I'm not saying that it's for an elite quarterback, for a really good quarterback, that's probably, you should expect it. With Tyler Van Dyke, who had moments of very good play, probably is going to take a little bit to get going. And we don't know if he would have broken out the bag with Tyler Van Dyke because Tyler Van Dyke got hurt on the first drive of the Alabama game. So let's cool down. Let's bring it down a level and think about perhaps Brian Ferentz as Wisconsin's new offensive. Right. Badger Pat said that in the chat. I have to at least give him a shout out because we are big Brian Ferentz followers. We big fans.
Maryland's offensive line has not had a great stretch. I think they're 1-6 in Big Ten play, and their only Big Ten win is over USC, which talk about a loss that's aged poorly.
So So before we wrap things up, I want go ahead. I'm sorry. What were you gonna say?
I do have one other larger picture thing that that just escaped me. So if you
Okay.
give me 10 seconds, it has to do with the offense to start the year. But if you give me
Well,
10
I mean,
seconds, it'll come back.
okay. Well, what I wanted to ask was, in terms of what the future holds for Luke Fickell at Wisconsin, we both, and maybe it's different, but if I remember correctly, we were both very bullish on his chances of being very successful at Wisconsin. Now, very successful, your definition can vary. I get that, especially with the new Big Ten and not having the Big Ten West and all those fantastic rivalry games with Northwestern and that like. But do you still feel, if you ever did, that Luke Fickell has the chance to turn Wisconsin into a legit contender in the Big Ten and for the college football playoff?
I think the college football playoff is easier at this point. I think Penn State's year this year is what Wisconsin's ceiling is. It's a lot of wins and then probably a loss to Ohio State or Oregon, but making the playoff. But
they don't get that. They don't get that schedule next year.
No, they don't. No, the schedules are going to be tough.
No, but next year, it's like, how hard was this year? Extremely hard. Next year, it's even worse.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be. I mean, that's the problem here. Is you make this move, and because you're looking to improve, right? Like you obviously want to improve, but that schedule next year is an absolute beast. It may be the hardest I've ever seen.
Yeah, it's like, sorry, it's on par with Florida's schedule this year, I think, give or take. But I think Florida is a good example of if you step back and have realistic expectations, you can understand what a success is. Florida might make a bowl game against their schedule with Mertz going down and with some horrible losses. Everybody wanted Napier fired in September, but now you turn up like they just beat LSU. They're having a good season against the schedule. I think we all as fans are going to accept what the reality is, and when we see top ranked teams every week on the schedule, you're not expecting them to go 9-3. Making a bowl game is still a totally a requisite, but there's always going to be that schedule. And this is the point I was going to make, and it has to do with Fickell's future. Curt Cignetti right now, whether people want to scream about how easy his schedule is or not, he is kind of showing that, like those clocks aren't like, you don't really get time anymore. And especially on offense, you mentioned, it might be too premature to expect a quarterback to come in and learn a system and be great. It's like, it didn't take Curtis Rourke any time. It didn't take them any time this season. That's what non-conference games are for. And they were great at the start. And now look at them. So I think seeing that happen the clock has started because Fickell just fired his biggest decision, which was Longo. But also with that happening simultaneously, the pressure's up. But to answer the question, I still think he can have Wisconsin in a good place. They could be a top third Big Ten program. That's what I said they probably were when they hired him. I'm not jumping from, now they get a new OC and suddenly they're going to contend for the conference. Because like, if we want to be realistic, they probably aren't going to do it. That just isn't what the modern day college football is. We hope they make the playoff. We hope they go 9-3, and there's a 10-2 season when the schedule lines up right. It's really about maximizing for that schedule, like what Ole Miss did this year. Put all your chips in, have the quarterback, get a bunch of big transfers, take advantage. So, yeah. I don't know. I'm trying to be measured going forward. I like Fickell. I still like him, but you can't separate. First of all, the insane social media marketing stuff is what it is,
which has been scaled back significantly,
which is a good thing, which I'm glad they did, because you can't really do that when the results are what they are. But you can't separate him from the Longo decision at the start. Like, that's an almost catastrophic mistake that he is going to get a second chance from.
He is. He's not going to get, he most likely not going to get a third. But the whole thing is, all these guys are connected, right? His next hire is connected to him. Fickell is connected to McIntosh, and McIntosh is connected to Fickell. He doesn't get to make another quarterback. He does not get to make another football hire. Chris McIntosh does not get to make another football hire. Agreed or no?
Yes, agreed. I don't know.
Especially considering some of the other stuff that has happened. Perhaps some of the, not great stuff that some of the fans are not pleased with. There's a reason he's getting booed. And it's not because the football team's not winning. I think it's because the football team's not winning, plus some other stuff that has happened along with it. So there, as tough as that is, because he was Barry's handpicked guy, he doesn't get to make another hire.
McIntosh is lucky that Guard is running a pristine A1 top-notch program and is poised for a big season. That's what we take away from this.
In the months of November and December, he has been fantastic the last few years.
Anything
on that or no?
On Guard?
Well, no. I mean, do you want to comment on it, saying he's pristine program?
Mm-hmm.
Because the program actually has to carry it into a new year, right? Like into a January and a February and a March, which it hasn't done. So, but this is a football show. We don't need to get into it. What I'm saying is, yes, Chris McIntosh doesn't have to make a decision on Greg Gard right now. Great. That's awesome.
Which is probably good for him, because if he did and he had to make one and he makes the wrong one, that's even more evidence. But I don't know how the athletic director, I have a much better feel for when football coaches stay with their jobs and when they don't. You know what I mean? I have less of a feel for the politics of the athletic director world. So it's hard to say whether he gets another chance. It is.
I think he's tied to it. You can't do what you did. Fire a coach who had won 60 some odd % of his games, pass over the homegrown,
right,
one of the most loved players in school history, and then go and hire a guy from Ohio State, Cincinnati, but Ohio State, and have him come up and not work whatsoever and get to make another hire. You messed up. Like you just don't get to do it, I don't think. But that's obviously Jennifer Mnuchin's problem, and not one that we're going to be talking about, because he's not going anywhere for a couple of years at least. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of pointless to even have the conversation. But
any other necessary Longo takes other than we never got to see his offense in inclement weather, even though I'm comfortable saying it would have sucked?
Yeah, it's unfortunate we didn't get any snow games. Will Phil Longo's offense work in the snow is a question that will go down in history, whether it ever, yeah.
You just don't believe in it. Yeah. They don't play in January. It doesn't snow in November.
Look, someone's saying, like, why are you talking as Fickell was fired? I'm not talking as if Fickell was fired. Longo was fired. What I'm saying is, if the next hire does not go well, he made a mistake with Phil Longo, right? That was a bad hire. He needs to hit this hire if he wants to be successful at Wisconsin. If he wants to stay at Wisconsin for an extended period, this is the hire that he needs to make and hit a home run with, or else we will be talking about that in a couple of years down the line.
You know what else he needs to do? And this ties in.
Get rid of the vest.
I would say so, but I'm not going to do fashion.
It's not the vest, though. It has nothing to do with the vest.
No, it's the letters. Mm-hmm. He needs, unlike this last offseason, he needs a nearly flawless offseason of transfer movement. Because think about next year, and I know it's a little bit over the skis, but on defense, you're losing your two best players. And I think Hunter Wohler means so much more than, his stats could ever show. So you're losing those guys. And I don't know. I look at their transfer class, and there are some hits. There also are some misses, like the rate on those hasn't been as good as it could be. But on offense, when you build around this new thing, whatever it is, you need to have an Indiana offseason. You can't have an offseason where you bring in guys that turn out to be not that good, don't contribute. And then, we can't just say, that sucks. He's still turning over the roster. It's like, no, that's going to be year 3. So whether it's his players, whether it's transfers, like that all has to hit. And that's Fickell. That's all Fickell. Or it's all an extension of him.
Yeah. Look, I'm not saying that Luke Fickell is done here. You know what I mean? Like, there's absolutely a way to turn things around and still succeed under Luke Fickell. but the hire is obviously the one that is just vital. I mean, I think that's obvious. I don't know that I even really need to say that. But you're right. The offseason's huge. The defense is getting, destroyed, right? Like you lose, how many of those guys do you lose? And the guys and the impact transfers that you did hit on, which I think you can certainly say Nazir Forkreen was a hit. He has played, I think, quite well this year. And then you can go Elijah Hills and say he's been that was quite the hit. Leon Lowry and John Pius, until last night, felt like misses. They had fantastic games, and you wondered kind of where that was the last few years, or I should say the earlier part of this season. Mm-hmm. And then the inside linebackers, Christian Allegro is a hit, obviously not a transfer, but a hit. And certainly we'll see more of Tackett Curtis next year too. So that the defense, like there's more opportunities for them to hit, but it's going to be another important year transfer portal wise. And I've seen like there's a reason, someone saying that there's a reason they're transfers. This is college football, man. This isn't guys upset not playing. They're looking for just better opportunities. These are guys at lower levels that are like, I can play at that next level. That's why I'm in the transfer portal. It's not about I'm not getting enough playing time. In some cases it is, but that's not always the case. We've seen lower guys come up and make huge impacts at higher levels, and that's where Wisconsin's probably going to have to live at, because you're not always going to go out and get the most expensive guys. So we shall see. Anything else you want to hit on? We good?
Yeah. I think that's all I got. I mean, yeah, I don't want to. I mean, we could say this. I was wrong about when they first hired Longo. I was excited. I was, my blinders were on to the risks. I think back then I, did an inadequate job of outlining the risks and where it could go wrong. And from that point, from when I started to do that, which was after the initial excitement of, they can throw and run. I think from that point, like it was kind of clear that it was a bad hire. And I never tried to convince myself that it was, now they've, that's all they need to figure it out. They just need more continuity. So there you go.
Well, I appreciate
I'm not taking a victory lap, but I'm just
I appreciate you owning up. Being held accountable is fantastic. Love it. Ben, really appreciate your time and jumping on, and we'll see. I'm sure the next few weeks and exactly how this hire is going to happen is going to be interesting. I'm sure he's got his guy. Already. We'll see. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you, Zach. Hire Paul Christ.
All right, everybody. We'll see you later. Me and Jess will be back on Tuesday with a full episode of the camp. If you want to talk about the Oregon game in a little bit and what Braden Locke and everything that happened the other night, please do, because we spent some time talking on that as well. Later.